What story are you living in? A story was given at a prison ministry conference in 2009 of a prison chaplain. And there was 500 prisoners, male prisoners. He had an idea for Mother's Day, and he thought, if I get them to make a card for Mother's Day. And every single one of 500 prisoners responded and made a Mother's Day card and sent it to their mums. And then Father's Day was coming around, and he thought, oh, that worked well for Mother's Day. I'll do the same thing for Father's Day. So out of 500 prisoners, how many do you think sent a card to their father on Father's Day? Any guesses? Not one single prisoner sent a card to his father on Father's Day. Not one. So every one of those prisoners was living in a story of father absence. But what does that say about the consequences of father absence in society? What about men in the church? The Relief and Development Agency, Tear Fund, carried out a survey. It was a few years ago, back in 2007, but it revealed some alarming statistics. 70% of boys raised in the church by their mid-teens or early 20s leave the church. 49% of men under 30 have left the church. And 35% of believing men in a 20-year period had also left the church. This survey reveals a 65-35 gender split in the church in the UK. So the church is actually more feminine than masculine. If this trend continues, it is predicted that by 2028, men will have virtually disappeared from the church in the UK. The tragic implication of this is that young men look to the world to find their manhood, and they therefore live in a different story than God's bigger story. It's as if leaving church is a sign of manhood. And it causes me to ask, what story does the church bring men into? I highlighted these statistics and this story of the 500 prisoners because it illustrates that the absence of fathers, both in society and spiritual fathers or mentors in the church, have devastating effects. Think of the Garden of Eden again. Think of Adam. Now, what speaks so very loudly is his silence. The silence of Adam. Think of the consequences of the silence of Adam. The whole of creation felt the consequences of Adam's silence. And what was those consequences? Well, he hid because he knew he was naked. He was scared. He blamed God and he blamed the woman. Ephesians 5 which is the chapter on husbands, wives and children. It's interesting that it's followed by the spiritual warfare passage in chapter 6. Now the implication of that is that father absence is a spiritual issue, both inside and outside the church. We've all been brought into a cosmic unseen war. That is the wider context. That's the bigger story that we must not pay lip service to. My name is Nigel Mohammed. I was put into the care system just after I was born. And so So I grew up without a mother and father in a large foster home. And my life was very chaotic. I started getting in trouble with the police from the age of about 12, 13. And from the age of about 12, 13 up until 19, I had a long criminal record. I was always in trouble with the police. And although I became a Christian at 21, quite early, I backslid. I never really got rooted and established in the church. And I got very deep into the drug scene, which was like a substitute family. And I was just so lost. I had no map to navigate my life. I was like a lion cub that has been cut off from its mother. Hungry, cold, scared, wandering through the jungle. I was in a story of survival. That was my story. But I no longer have a survival mindset anymore, which is actually an orphan mindset. Now, I got back with the Lord at the end of my 20s. When I come out of the drug scene, I repented, got back with the Lord. And I went to Southeast Asia with a mission organisation, but shortly after, when I returned, I had a serious car accident. And I broke both my legs, I was in a wheelchair. And I've lived with chronic physical pain ever since. So for 30 years, I've lived with chronic physical pain. But that, when I look back on that, I see that as an initiation. God drove me into a long wilderness, and it was just me and him. And I had to learn to walk again, and I had no qualifications. But God taught me how to fight by faith. He taught me to persevere, to endure against adversity, against living with pain. It built perseverance into the very warp and woof of my being. And I look back and see that as an initiation, and that may seem a bit strange, but initiation rites of passage, which had been rejected by Western culture since just after the Industrial Revolution, really, it can be argued. But initiation rites of passage, which of universal acceptance historically and significance, they have 3 stages: separation from the present, from the familiar and the safe; transition, where we learn new ways of being, and it's where we change and seek a new future; and incorporation. We recognise that we have changed, and we are ready to offer who we have become for other people. So my accident was a defining moment in my life. And I've learned that the 2 main themes that underpin the bigger story, God's bigger story, are becoming and overcoming. We become who we are by what we overcome. So we have to be connected with who we are becoming in our uniqueness because of what we've overcome. And understand those 2 themes are part and fundamental to God's bigger story. Now, Jonathan, the son of King Saul, he also faced a defining moment in 1 Samuel chapter 14. Now, the context in chapter 30 is that Israel is in a minority, facing overwhelming opposition. They wanted to be like the other nations, and they demanded a king of their own. And God gave them what they wanted. And God made it very clear what the character of Saul would be like. But they still wanted a king, and they still wanted to be like other nations. You could argue that today the church is similar to that situation. The church today is in a minority, facing hostile opposition. Now Saul has 3,000 men with him who are faint-hearted, they're weak, and they're trembling. The kingdom actually has been taken away from Saul because he was disobedient. The 3,000 men are reduced to 600. So you have 600 men hiding in caves, along with Saul, who is also hiding and is their leader. And also they have no weapons apart from Saul and Jonathan. Now on the other side of the mountain, there's two mountain peaks, and on the other side there are thousands of Philistines are lined up for battle. And it says in 1 Samuel 13 verse 5 that people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. Maybe a part of life-giving manhood is to go into a battle that you're not sure that you can win, but you go in anyway because you know deep down inside that it is the right thing to do. Over 2,000 men have retreated and gone home. 600 men are hiding in caves. Jonathan has an absent father who is also hiding, yet Jonathan looks at the countless thousands of Philistines and incredibly he's prepared to die for a greater cause than himself. There's something different about this man. This really inspired me. He's wired to be different because of who he belongs to. He belongs to God and he knows what God can do. This inspired me to write a book on father absence and men that hide in caves. So in chapter 14, verse 6 to 10, Jonathan is facing an impossible battle. But he has another man at his side, plus God. So many men face so many battles. Jonathan looks at the thousands of Philistines lined up for battle. The 600 men are hiding. He says to the man at his side, who is his armour bearer, he says, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men." Uncircumcised, meaning they're not in covenant with the one true God. So why should we fear them? It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. Now, you've got two men going up against countless thousands of men on the basis of it may be. It may be that the Lord will work for us. They don't know. They haven't got a clear word from God. Now, how his armour bearer responds is very crucial. His armour bearer may have had a survival instinct and wanted to live. And he could have looked at Jonathan and said, "You haven't taken your pills today, have you?" He could have said, "Have you just escaped from the local asylum?" But he didn't, did he? No. His armour bearer turned round and said, "Do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you according to your heart." The armour bearer is prepared to die and live in a bigger story than the majority, than the 2,000 men who've retreated, than the 600 men that are hiding in caves. What's the key point here? Jonathan's heart is not buried by a father wound. He knows what makes his heart come alive. And he's prepared to lay down his life. He's prepared to die for a much greater cause. And that's the cause of the kingdom of God and for the glory of God. The well-known missionary David Livingstone, his heart was buried in Africa because that's where it belonged. When I die, where would they bury my heart? Where would they bury your heart? If you were to die tonight, where would they bury your heart? Our hearts can become buried from the battles that we have fought in our lives. And so our story is one of survival. So many men live in a story of survival. We're just getting by. Think of all the battles that we fight today. Busyness is one of the major giants that we have to fight. We need to know what God has put in our hearts, but we need to have true friends we can confide in and share our hearts to pursue a greater story to live in and to share that this is what God has put in my heart. This is the stirring of his spirit. Will you pray with me? Will you pray for me? Let's move forward together. Now they're facing absolutely impossible odds. They're looking at certain death. What is the strategy? You're going to need a pretty amazing strategy to overcome impossible odds. What is Jonathan's strategy? Well, this is what he says in verse 9 to 10. We can see his strategy. He says, "If they say, 'We will come over to you,' then we will stay here." In other words, we will be defensive. But if they say, come over to us, we will move toward them, because this will be a sign that the Lord has delivered them into our hands. Now, that's probably not the greatest military strategy in the history of the world. He does not even have a clear word from God, and yet he's willing to face death on the basis of a maybe. And it may be the Lord will work for us. But check it out. What is Jonathan really saying? Jonathan is saying that God is sovereign over all. God is sovereign over the very tongues and the hearts of men, whoever those men might be. Whether they're in covenant with God or outside of covenant with God. And he's saying that, God, I need a sign. If I'm going to risk my life, I need you to give me a sign that you are showing up for us. And he says, as if he says to God, God, have them say this, then I will know that you have given them into our hands. Let that be a sign. And they do. They say exactly the very thing that Jonathan says for them to say. Because God is sovereign over the hearts and the tongues of men. So God shows up. They move forward against thousands of men. But God shows up. There's an earthquake. They take out 20 men, fighting hand-to-hand battle. The battle shifts. There's an earthquake. There's a major shift. The 600 are hiding in the caves. They come out of their caves onto the battlefield and they pursue the enemy. But the 600 men come out of their caves to get the spoils. But it is 2 men plus God defeated countless thousands of Philistines. Men in the military have a great camaraderie because they know that they may have to lay their lives down. We are called this. We are called to do this for each other as men. We are called to lay our lives down for each other. Now, moving forward into chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, and Jonathan, who's just fought a great battle and has been heroic, and has shown very clearly that he is more fit to wear the crown than Saul is. Now, in chapter 18, he meets David for the first time. And on the day that he met David, he did 2 remarkable things. And this can show us something about what true friendship is. And give us a basis for true brotherhood. He's next in line to be king, Jonathan. And so he could have felt really threatened by David. David had just killed Goliath, which must have really spun them out. Because they're all scared of him. He's 9 foot tall, something like that. This little boy David kills him. So he could have felt threatened by this guy, by David. What does he do? He does 2 things. First, he made a covenant with him. That they would look out for each other, and that they would also look out for each other's family, whoever died first. That they would look after the other person's family. And they renewed that covenant again the last time they saw each other in chapter 23. So these 2 occasions of making a covenant with each other bracketed one of the toughest times in David's life. Because from chapter 19 right up until chapter 24 is a period of suffering in David's life like he's never known before. But he has a great friendship. And that makes so much of a difference. So of course God comes through for him because God provides the friendship. But the point is that he's not in the trenches alone when he is suffering most. Second thing is that he gave David his robe. He gave him his armour, his sword, his bow and his belt. In other words, on the basis of that vulnerability, he offered a true friendship because he made himself vulnerable. Now the armour represents his defences. So if we want authentic brotherhood and connection, we have to be prepared to take a risk and be vulnerable and to take down any walls of self-protection that we hide behind, or the way that we do life and survive. To the extent that we have bought the conditioning of the culture that men must not show any emotions, must not show weakness. we will still have walls of self-protection. So what Jonathan did on the day that he met David can serve as an example for brotherhood, for true, authentic brotherhood that longs to live in a bigger story than just survival. Both Jonathan and David experienced profound father absence, but they lived in a bigger story than the effects of father absence. They lived to advance a great kingdom. What kind of friendships do men really have? How do people do friendships today? Do we develop authentic friendships like Jonathan and David by going on Facebook? Well, I don't think so, do you? Their friendship was forged in a much larger story of warfare and advancing the kingdom of God, living in a much greater, epic, magnificent, larger story of redemption. We need to live in that story as brothers. To summarise my main points that I've made today, father absence is a colossal epidemic, but it is a silent epidemic. Adam was silent. We must not be silent. We must not live in the shadow of the first Adam. Both the culture and the church do not provide clear, intentional initiation rites of passage for young men. But that does not mean that we cannot start something for younger men. That does not mean that we cannot have initiation rites of passage for younger men in the church. We need to have a vision for a men's ministry that includes this. The last Adam, Jesus, is both lamb and lion. He has a tender, gentle, nurturing side, but he has a fierce, strong warrior side that fights the powers of darkness, advances a great kingdom, and fights for others. We must do the same because we are called to be like Christ. But if a man is too much lamb, you can get a weak, passive, disengaged man. Too much lion and you get a macho fool. We are to help each other be like Jesus and to work toward a balance of lion and lamb in harmony. Jesus lived in a small platoon of 12 men, but he deeply invested in 3. He trained and released 12 men, but focusing on 3 in particular. Let us do the same. For look what just 12 men achieved by living in a bigger story against the might of the Roman Empire. We have the same God. So who do we want to be? Do we want to be like the 600 men who are hiding in caves when there is many battles to fight? Not just in our own lives, but in the culture. Or do we want to be like Jonathan and his armour bearer and take the road less travelled and actually move in to a bigger story for others? Thank you.